They raise their voice. You don't. They want a reaction. You give them stillness. In a world where most people mistake volume for power, your silence becomes a kind of rebellion. Because the truth is, anyone can scream. It takes no skill, no grace, and no strength to lose control. But to stay calm while someone else falls apart, that's uncommon. That's dangerous. That's real power. We've been taught to fight back, defend ourselves, match energy with energy. But have you ever noticed what happens when someone's shouting and you don't flinch? When their anger crashes like waves and you stand like stone? Suddenly, they feel exposed, silly even, because their rage was meant to pull you in, and you didn't move. That's the Stoic way, not passive, not submissive, but sovereign. In this video, we're going to walk through 6 ways to handle people who scream at you not by shrinking, not by screaming louder, but by mastering the one thing they can't touch, your mind. You'll learn how to stay composed when others lose themselves, how to own the moment without raising your voice, and how to walk away not in weakness, but in quiet dominance. Because power doesn't always look like a clenched fist. Sometimes it looks like a calm breath, an unreadable stare, and the simple decision not to let noise define you. Let's begin. Number 1. Detach from the noise, not the reality. When someone yells at you, especially someone close, it doesn't just hit your ears, it hits your nervous system. It's the kind of moment that takes you back to old survival patterns, even if you thought you'd outgrown them. And for men, especially those raised to either suppress emotion or fight back on instinct, that moment can become a trap. The heart rate spikes. The mind starts calculating. You feel a pull to either shut down or go to war. But Stoicism gives you another option, one that most men never learned growing up. Instead of reacting to the volume, you learn to observe the motive. A man once told me about a moment with his adult son. He had refused to co-sign another car loan after already bailing him out multiple times. The son exploded accusations, raised voice, blame. The father instinctively started defending his position but caught himself, and then something shifted. He stepped back emotionally and asked a different question. Not aloud, but within. What's actually happening here? That question changes everything. Because in that moment, the screaming wasn't really about the loan. It was about loss of control. It was about entitlement being challenged. It was about unresolved expectations clashing with reality. And had the father reacted to the noise, argued back, raised his voice, defended his record, he would have fed the fire. But by staying still, he broke the pattern. He didn't win the argument. He didn't need to. He regained clarity, and with it, composure. This is what Marcus Aurelius meant when he said, "You always own the option of having no opinion." That line isn't about apathy, it's about sovereignty. When someone screams, they want to pull you into their emotional orbit. But you don't have to orbit anything. You can pause. You can detach not from the relationship, not from the truth, but from the chaos of the moment. That's the key distinction. Detaching from noise doesn't mean withdrawing from reality. You still hold the facts. You still enforce boundaries, but you do it without letting your inner world be hijacked by theirs. For older men, this is especially vital. We've seen how quickly anger turns into regret, how fast an outburst can stain a relationship. And we've also learned that restraint isn't weakness, it's wisdom earned through failure. Detachment, when rooted in clarity, becomes a shield against manipulation, guilt, and emotional confusion. So, next time someone screams whether it's out of fear, pride, or desperation, don't meet the fire with more fire. Stand still in your own presence. Let them rage if they must, but don't confuse their volume with truth. Most of the time, it's just fear dressed up as authority. And the Stoic, he doesn't fight for dominance. He holds the frame not because he's passive, but because he refuses to lose himself just to be heard by someone who isn't really listening. Number 2, use silence as a shield. There's a particular kind of power that doesn't speak, but it says everything. It's the kind of power that unnerves people who rely on noise to feel in control. Men who use volume as leverage often do it not to be heard, but to overpower. And when you don't respond, when you don't flinch, explain, or retaliate, it doesn't calm them. It exposes them. An older man once shared a moment that stuck with me. He was in his early 60s, had weathered decades of family drama. And during a tense holiday dinner, his younger brother, known for stirring conflict, began accusing him of being distant, selfish, and cold. The room went quiet. Everyone braced for a rebuttal, a loud defense, maybe even a shouting match, but it never came. He just looked at his brother, not with contempt, not with a smirk, just stillness. He held his coffee, sat back, and said nothing. The silence dragged on, not because he was unsure, but because he was unmoved. That silence did something no argument could have. It left the accuser alone with the sound of his own anger, and it was deafening. His voice cracked, his tone shifted. He looked around for support that never came. Eventually, he sat back, unsure of what had just happened. This wasn't passive aggression. It was disciplined stillness, stoic silence, the kind Epictetus described when he said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." The silence wasn't avoidance, it was control. It was refusing to let another man's emotional chaos dictate the rhythm of your soul. For many men, especially those raised to believe that silence is weakness, this kind of restraint doesn't come naturally. We are taught that to stay silent is to be submissive. But in reality, silence, used wisely, is a form of dominance, not over others, but over yourself. The psychology behind it is simple. Most people who scream do so expecting resistance. It validates their behavior, it justifies the chaos. But when you hold your ground without feeding the fire, you short-circuit the entire emotional equation. Your silence becomes a mirror. It forces them to face the disproportion of their reaction. And if they don't change in that moment, they will remember it, because there's nothing more disarming than a man who will not be moved. This practice isn't about superiority, it's about sovereignty. You don't raise your voice because you've raised your standards. You don't shout because you've trained your nervous system not to take the bait. In that silence, you're not disengaged, you're deeply present. But your presence isn't emotionally as elemental, grounded, calm, and in a world addicted to noise. The man who can sit still and say nothing while being screamed at becomes something terrifying to the insecure, untouchable. That's the Stoics' shield, not just silence, but the kind of silence that makes others finally hear themselves. Number 3. Protect your boundaries without apology. There's a certain kind of scream that doesn't come from rage, but from disbelief the moment you finally say enough. The person who's been crossing your boundaries for years looks at you like you're the one causing harm. That scream? It's not about what you did. It's about what they're no longer allowed to do. A retired tradesman once told me about the moment he drew a line with his daughter. She had moved back home in her 30s after a divorce, and had slowly begun treating his house and his time as hers to manage. She would wake him up late at night, borrow his truck without asking, and regularly guilt him into canceling plans. He let it slide for months, wanting to be supportive. But one day, after being screamed at for not helping her move furniture on short notice, simply said, "This doesn't work for me anymore." No yelling, no anger, just a sentence with weight. Her response was instant. Yelling, accusations, tears. It wasn't the boundary that hurt her. It was the realization that she no longer had unfiltered access. This is what most people don't understand. Setting a boundary isn't aggression, it's survival. And often, the people who scream the loudest are the ones who've benefited the longest from your silence. Stoicism teaches us that boundaries are not expressions of anger but of order. Seneca wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." And sometimes, the greatest adversity is reclaiming yourself from the people who claim to love you, but only on their terms. When someone screams in response to your boundaries, don't mistake that for evidence that you're being harsh. You're not. You're just finally choosing to stop being manipulated. The discomfort they feel is not your burden. It's the growing pain of a system being disrupted, a dynamic that has thrived on imbalance now facing correction. The psychology behind this is clear. Many people rely on your compliance to maintain their emotional control. When you remove that compliance, they panic not because they love you less, but because they feel less powerful. Boundaries rob controlling people of their hidden leverage. What's left is raw exposure, their inability to function without dominance. The Stoic doesn't scream back. He doesn't defend with explanations. He simply states the line and holds it. You don't owe repeated warnings. You don't owe apologies. You owe yourself peace. And sometimes peace requires silence at the door, a locked gate, or a quiet exit. If they truly care, they'll adjust. If they only cared about control, they'll escalate. Either way, you've received clarity. The man who lives without boundaries invites chaos. The man who enforces them invites respect, even if it comes after resistance. And the Stoic understands protecting your energy may cost you noise in the short term. But in the long run, it buys you the life you actually want to live without screaming, without guilt, and without apology. Number 4. Don't try to win the screamer over. Have you ever found yourself mid-sentence, trying to reason with someone whose voice is already drowning yours out, and suddenly wondered, why am I even explaining this? It's a trap many men fall into, especially those raised to believe that logic calms emotion, that explanation leads to resolution. But when someone's screaming at you, you're not in a dialogue, you're in a performance, and they expect you to play a role, the guilty one, the submissive one, the fixer. And when you try to win them over with reason, you're stepping straight onto their stage. The need to be understood is deeply human, especially for older men who are taught to provide clarity, to defend honor, to justify their stance. But there's a darker truth here. People who scream aren't usually seeking understanding. They're seeking control. And the moment you begin explaining yourself, defending, justifying, softening your tone, you've already given up the frame. Think of it like trying to pour water into a glass that's already shattered. Your words don't land. They leak, get distorted, evaporate into noise. And the more you try to explain, the more unstable the container becomes. The Stoics warned against wasting our breath on those who are not ready to hear. Epictetus put it simply, only the educated are free. And in this context, educated means emotionally mature. It means capable of receiving dialogue, not just delivering accusation. So what does the Stoic do instead? He stops performing. He doesn't withdraw in silence out of spite, but out of clarity. He recognizes the futility of trying to correct someone who's not actually listening. And more than that, he realizes that his peace isn't a negotiation. It's not something to trade for temporary calm. It's non-transferable. Psychologically, many screamers operate off a reinforcement loop. I scream, and you come closer. But when you don't engage, when you hold a firm, respectful pause, they lose access to that fuel. And often, that's what breaks the cycle, not argument, not logic, just the absence of emotional payoff. This doesn't mean you walk away from every confrontation, but it does mean you stop treating every scream as an invitation to explain yourself. Some situations require space, others boundaries, and occasionally, the hardest ones require you to accept that someone doesn't want resolution. They want dominance dressed up as dialogue. A man who has learned the weight of his words knows when to withhold them, not to punish, but to preserve. So if you feel yourself falling into the trap of trying to be understood in the middle of someone else's chaos, stop. Breathe. Step back. You don't need to win them over. You need to stay upright. That's the Stoic way, not stubbornness, but sovereignty. It's not silence, but sanity. Number 2. Recognize the pain behind the volume. Studies in neurobiology show that when a person screams, their brain is often reacting to a perceived threat, even if no actual danger exists. In other words, yelling is frequently a trauma response, not a calculated strategy. It's the nervous system's last-ditch effort to reassert control when someone feels emotionally cornered. But here's where it gets complicated. If you take that scream at face value, you'll think it's about you, when often it isn't. This is where most men fall into conflict. We hear the raised voice, feel the emotional heat, and instinctively respond with defense or dominance. But Stoicism offers a different approach, one rooted in discernment. Not everything said in a scream deserves your reaction, and not every scream is a reflection of your wrong. What you're hearing may be decades of unresolved fear, shame, or frustration finally breaking the surface. That doesn't mean you should tolerate abuse. But it does mean that if you take everything personally, you'll get dragged into battles that were never meant for you. The Stoic doesn't excuse the scream, but he also doesn't absorb it. The deeper lesson here is that people often scream when they're hurt not by you, but by life, by themselves, by what they've lost or never had the tools to face. The volume may be pointed at you, but the wound is older than your presence. And the moment you recognize that, you gain a form of psychological freedom. You're not required to fix what you didn't break. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Whenever someone does wrong by you, immediately consider what notion of good or evil they had in doing it." This isn't about justifying poor behavior. It's about understanding the mental state behind it. When someone screams, they are often reacting from a distorted sense of reality. Their view of you, of the situation, is filtered through emotion, fear, or memory. You can't reason with that. You can only choose not to meet it with more chaos. What this means in practice is simple, but powerful. Pause before reacting. Notice your own urge to defend. Then remember that their behavior is Dayton, a verdict on your worth, but a window into theirs. You don't have to carry their pain, and you certainly don't have to be their punching bag, but you can hold your ground without escalation. You can respond without collapsing into explanation or retaliation. Compassion, in Stoic terms, is clarity, not rescue. It's the ability to see the suffering in others without being consumed by it. That's what makes you unshakable, not cold, not detached, but solid. So the next time someone raises their voice, ask yourself, what is this really about? And then remember, it probably isn't about you at all. Number 6. Choose stillness over strategy. There's a difference between reacting and responding, and most people never learn it. In high-stress situations, especially when someone is screaming in your face, the instinct is to strategize, to formulate the perfect comeback, to dismantle their argument to win. But the Stoics had no interest in winning arguments. They were interested in winning themselves. That's why the most powerful thing you can do in the face of verbal chaos is not to speak louder or smarter, but to still yourself, not as a tactic, but as a practice. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Be like the rock that the waves keep crashing over. It stands unmoved, and the raging of the sea falls still around it." That isn't metaphor, it's instruction. When someone is raging, they expect resistance. When none comes, their rhythm collapses. Most men are trained to solve tension with more tension. But composure is not weakness. It's the ultimate assertion of control. Stillness in the storm doesn't say, "I'm ignoring you." It says, "I cannot be moved by you." And that is a message far more unnerving than any argument. Psychologically, when you refuse to match a screamer's intensity, it scrambles their system. Their nervous system is primed for escalation. They expect combat. But when you remain calm, shoulders down, tone even, body grounded, you deny them the chaos they crave. You interrupt the loop. This is not passive. It's deeply active self-command. Seneca said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Stillness isn't what you do, it's what you withhold. The urge to win, the need to correct, the reflex to meet disrespect with dominance. You hold it all back, not because you're weak, but because you've chosen to remain sovereign over your own mind. In this space, your goal isn't resolution. You don't need to walk away victorious. You need to walk away intact. And sometimes, that means saying nothing, holding the line, letting their storm rage without pulling you into it. That's what Stoicism calls for, not cleverness, not performance, but serenity. It's not easy, especially for men who've been trained to respond, to lead, to never back down. But stillness isn't backing down. It's standing so firmly that even rage has no place to land. Let them hurl their words. Let them push for a reaction. You keep breathing. You keep your tone steady. And when the moment passes into it, they'll walk away shaken by a truth they didn't expect. You didn't need to win because you never lost yourself. So choose stillness, not as a trick, but as a way of life. Because the Stoic knows that nothing disarms disorder more than presence that cannot be touched. And as Epictetus reminded us, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. And freedom is not achieved by satisfying desire, but by eliminating desire, including the desire to win a battle you never needed to fight.